Good morning, class.
Good morning, teacher.
All right, excellent. Okay, so I've done this lecture a couple of times, but I haven't done it in like a very long time. But everyone was bugging me a while ago about brushes again and saying something about, and I was out in the store helping someone. I said, you don't want that brush, you want this brush. Well, how come nobody ever teaches that? How come that's not in the art? And I was like, I teach brushing. Well, do the brushing. Then Ryan says, do the brush thing. I said, well, I'll think about it. He goes, oh, it's online already. I put it up. I'm like, it's done. He goes, oh, we already got 10 people. All right. I'm like, good God, I haven't even left the store. Anyways, okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about brushes. Please ask lots of questions. And I just remember one thing. Just remember this, that there really, honestly, there are no stupid questions, just stupid people who ask them. All right. We get no questions now because everyone's afraid to ask. All right, no. This is a mural brush. You can't buy them in Canada. You can't buy them in the United States. But in Europe, they sell them all over the place. Every art store has them. It's just a brush with a long handle, so you can stay way back from your painting and put some marks on, and you can see what you're doing if you're doing a very large painting. So, this part of the brush is the same price as everything else, and at the price of wood, it's only, $900 for a stick. Anyways, this is my favorite brush. The only reason I really like this brush, because I'm not like Elena, I don't do murals, but why I like this brush is because you're painting and then you can that's so good. All right, okay, so brushes. The interesting thing about a brush is that probably zero people consider is the fact that it is an extremely weirdly delicate instrument. And when I say delicate, I don't mean it's delicate like a flower, touchy-feely delicate. What I mean, the job that it has to do is so minute and so small that it has to be exactly right or it won't do what it needs to do. What that means is a brush needs to be of a material. It's okay, come on in. All right. Woo! Oh yeah, love it. Yeah, you tell them. No, it's all good. This has to be of such a delicate material, no, I wouldn't say delicate, but of such a material that what's on here, the hair or the bristle or whatever the end is, will pick up paint. It needs to be of something that it will pick up whatever you're about to lay down. So it needs to be absorbent. It needs to pick up something and hold that something without it falling off. And then it needs to be of such a structure that when you put it on something, the paint comes off and doesn't stick to the brush. So this is where the brush lesson comes in, is because I found the few types of brushes that are out there do different things, and people are always buying the wrong brush for the thing that they want. And that being said, 90% of why people are buying the wrong brush, well, I would say, let's say 50-50 of why they're buying the wrong brushes. A, they've been told by someone who doesn't know anything about a brush, or B, all of the brush things that I have out there, 90% of them say, good for oil and acrylic, good for oil acrylic watercolor, good for everything, an all-around brush. Well, technically all brushes are good for, you can use a brush for anything. Any brush will do whatever it wants to do. But certain brushes do much better at some things, and certain brushes do better at other things, right? So all of the hairs are a little bit different, and they all do different things. So we want a brush that's going to take in a lot of paint and hopefully then release a lot of paint. So the problem with the release a lot of paint is that also comes down to the substrate that you're working on, your base, your canvas, your support, whatever you're working on. If you're working on aluminum, if you're working on a smooth gesso panel, if you're working on canvas, working on linen, rougher stuff, that all depends on what the surface is as to how the paint is going to come off the brush. Rougher surfaces take more paint. So if you're on a rough surface, more paint will come off the brush. If you're on a smooth surface, less paint comes off. So that tells you right away, if you're on a smooth surface, you'd better have a brush that releases a lot of paint or you're in big trouble. All you get is smushy. If you're on a rough surface, you could probably use any kind of brush you want because that rough surface is going to grab the paint and pull it off the brush anyways. All right? Okay, so let's get into a bit about brushes. So I'm just going to show you all of these brushes here that we have. Okay, all of these, you see these? So, okay, so what time is it? I got to know how long we got here because that's a lot of brushes. Oh, wait, those are all identical. These are, every brush here is the same thing. They don't do anything different. Only this black-haired brush right here will do one thing different, and I'll get to that in a minute, that little guy in the middle. Otherwise, every brush that's there is exactly the same. So, you know, even though I own less than 50% of a store now because my ex-wife has the other half, and now this mongrel here has taken over, and now I probably don't own anything. It's all gone. So I'm going to tell you that don't buy any of these. You don't need any of them. They're all the same, right? So let me get into that. That's a handful of brushes. Whoops. Okay, so when it comes to brushes, there's only two kinds of hairs that we're using. Synthetic hair and natural hair. Natural hair is going to be comprised of numerous things. Goat, squirrel, pig, horse. They probably have, or you could probably go to Kensington Art and get donkey hair. I don't know, they sell cheap brushes there. So just, no, I'm kidding. So you could probably get just about anything natural. So anything from a living animal, I mean, you could use human hair. Natural hair, right, is all from an animal-based product. Synthetic is all plastic. It's all nylon-based. It's all petroleum product-based. They're all synthetic. They're all plastic. So that every one of these brushes is a synthetic brush. Okay, and there's only two differences between any of these brushes. One is the stiffness of hair, so which says some nylons are thicker and heavier and meatier than others. Others are softer and are really, really floppy. But every one of these is a nylon hair. They're basically all the same. The difference between most of these is they've just been dyed. Some of them are dyed gold, some of them are dyed brown, some of them are dyed white, some of them have black hair. This is a little stiffer, but they all do basically the same thing. So I don't know why in the world this is. For those of you who paint, or those of you who are in an art class and never seen this, but I don't know why this happens, but Brian he'll attest to this, but oil painter comes along and says, oh, I'm here to take class, and they pull out 5 brushes, 3 of which have 2 hairs left and 1 has only this much hair on it, and they've had those 5 brushes. Oh, my grandma gave me this brush, I have to use it, right? So they only have 5 brushes and they're all in terrible condition. A watercolorist shows up, unravels this thing and rolls out this thing, and there's 47 brushes in there. Every size, shape imaginable. Watercolorists seem to go, oh, I don't have that brush, that'll be the one, that's the one. I don't know I don't know why that happens, but I'm here to tell you, you probably don't need any of all of that. Okay, I'm going to show you the difference here. Natural hair looks like this. Synthetic hair looks like this. It's just a nylon fiber. Every one of those fibers is thin, straight, and has nothing to it. Some are stiffer, some are gold, some are whatever. It does not make a difference. A natural hair brush here looks like this. So if you've ever seen the commercials about shampooing your hair and the cuticles in your hair and how the oil and dirt settles in there and you got to wash your hair, all of these little pockets that are in here are in a natural haired brush. Here's the difference. Synthetic brush holds that much paint. Very thin layer of paint will go around it. There is nothing to hold that paint on the brush. So it soaks in a little bit of paint and it sits on there, very little paint. And if it's acrylic is plastic. Acrylic loves plastic brushes. So if you have a synthetic brush and you put acrylic on it, what happens? The acrylic brush and the plastic hair in the brush and the plastic that's in the acrylic, they love each other. So they hang out together and they don't want to leave. So the brush will pick up a lot of paint but release nothing. So all of these synthetic brushes when you're painting with acrylic are good for thin, loose, crazy, thin brush marks. They don't work for heavy brush marks, and they never will. And the problem that people have is they go, well, I'm not getting any paint off my brush. I better buy another brush, a different kind of brush. Oh, I should buy a bigger brush because I need more to get more paint on. That's not helping you. It's because the paint doesn't want to come off. Synthetic brush with oil paint, more paint will come off a synthetic brush when you use oil paint, but still it wants to stick to the brush and not come off. So as I said at the very opening statement, a brush is a very delicate thing. It wants to pick up paint, and it has to be of a substrate that will let the paint come off the brush, and synthetic brushes tend not to want to release the paint as much. So, natural hairbrush does this, and when you put paint on it, that's the blob of paint that you get on a natural hairbrush. Because of the little cuticles that are sticking out, they grab the paint and they will hold 2 to 3 times as much paint. Therefore, more paint will come off a natural hairbrush. So, what I'm saying now is synthetic brushes don't release a lot of paint. Natural hairbrushes release more. That doesn't mean you don't need a synthetic brush. I use synthetic brushes, but when do I use them? Probably mostly for skies. When I want wispification, write that down, that's a word. When I want wispification in my clouds, I will take a big fat synthetic brush like this and I will wispify it because the paint doesn't want to stick, it doesn't want to release, it will leave a soft edge. If you want soft edges, if you want lots of delicate stuff in your painting, then use synthetic brushes. If you want to be bold, brave, and chunky monkey, you better be using a natural hairbrush. And for the most part, when I say natural hair, the ones that are horsehair, camel hair, all those little floppy ones and some of the big wide ones, a lot of them are for watercolor. It's because a natural hairbrush, again, will hold more water and release more water, but they're very floppy, so they don't work for oil. The best for oil, or for acrylic and oil, if you want a natural brush, is a hog bristle brush. So when they say, the problem is, up until about 1980, if a brush said bristle on it, it meant natural hair. So when you went to a paint store, like to a Cloverdale paint store or Sherman-Williams paint store, and you were a house painter and you said, I need a 4-inch bristle brush, they would hand you a $40 bristle brush that was made of hog hair. And to this day, I know some of my friends are painters, they're house painters, they will still buy bristle brushes to paint a house with, to trim the house, because those brushes hold more paint, release more paint. They're far more expensive, but they last 10 times as long. And so they will use those brushes still to this day. Sometime in the 80s, something happened where companies decided that the word bristle became universal for a hair that is on a brush. It does not matter what it's made out of, it's called a bristle. And so everything that's called a bristle brush now is just a bristle brush. But it could be synthetic, it could be natural. So then, since then, now what's happened is every art manufacturer that makes brushes puts a display out there and says, oh, here's our fine gray matters bristle brush. Well, it is a bristle technically, I guess, but it says good for oil and acrylic. Well, it is good for oil and acrylic, but how good is the problem? So I get everyone saying, well, I bought this brush. I tell them, oh, you bought this synthetic brush and it's not working. I go, well, because it's for acrylic, it's not for oil. And they're like, but it said it was good for acrylic and oil. I know. So I want to take every art company and I'm going to take a little drive across this world and kick them all and say, quit writing that on there. I hate that. Anyways, so what happens here is a bristle brush will hold twice as much paint and will release more paint. So if you want chunky monkey, you want thick brush marks, you want to leave a statement on your painting, you need to be using a hog bristle brush. And when I say hog bristle, there is 3 kinds of hog bristle. Okay? There is cheap, regular, and good. Cheap hog bristle brushes, they're all made from a pig, from a Chinese boar. The cheap ones, they take the pig and they grab it by the butt and they hold the butt and they shave its ass, literally. And they take those hairs and stuff it in a brush and make a brush. That's your El Cheapo brush. The good brushes are made from the inner ear of the pig. The inner ear of the hair in there is twice as thick, twice as strong. And the only reason that is because it's made to keep all the mud and goo that the pig rolls around in out of the ear. So the butt ones are cheap. The inner ear ones are strong. Your medium brushes are made of a little bit of both of those, okay? The really good brushes are made from deep in the inner ear. They are expensive. And I will tell you, for the most part, 90% of the time, the value of a brush, if it's expensive, it's a better brush. It's the one thing I do know that I believe in. I mean, not necessarily because the TV is more money, it's a better TV. I don't know about that. But I will tell you that a brush, if it's more money, is almost always a better quality of something, as long as you're buying the right brush that you need. So a good hog bristle brush like this is my, so just so you know, this is my very favorite brush. This is what they call an HJ blue handle brush. That is my very favorite brush. I have not found a brush for the amount of money that you pay for this that will last as long and be as good. Every company makes a good bristle brush. Princeton makes a good brush. Winsor Newton makes a good brush. Liquitex makes a good brush. You know, Jack Richardson they all make good brushes, but this is made in Japan, not Indonesia. It's made in, most of the brushes are made in Indonesia or in India. This is still made in Japan by a guy. He is now 84 years old. I don't know how long he's going to make them for. Hopefully he's got a guy in line to keep making them, because this still is the best brush I've ever found for painting with. I can use a brush like this for 2 or 3 years and I paint every day.
How much is it?
Oh, this is probably $12. 12, 14 bucks for this brush. Not cheap, but if I get 2 years out of a brush, that's not expensive at all, right? So, you know, and the problem is, a lot of times, even if a brush is more expensive, we'll get to cleaning in a minute, but the problem is most people's problems with their brushes is cleaning. And we'll get to cleaning in a sec. You guys aren't cleaning your brushes right. And you got to be Scottish like me and cheap and learn. I'm not spending any more money on brushes. I'm going to be cheap and clean my brush. Okay, so.
Can you recognize the difference between a butt hair and an ear hair?
Yes, I can. Yeah, usually.
Can we?
No, but usually it's a price thing. But let's go back to that for a sec, because I want to talk something else that I like about this hog hair brush. I'm just going to redraw the top of this brush like this. Okay, so in the cheap brush on the butt hairs, they're just regular hairs, and they kind of look like this. So they have all these little follicles, but they go to a point, and they do that. Okay, good inner ear hairs do this. They split. They have what you poor ladies that cringe when I say this, you get split ends. If you take this brush and look at it and take the hair and look at it, I'll pass this around. You can pull the hair out and look. Those little ends are split. So it gets a split end on it, okay? Your cheaper butt-haired brushes are usually don't have split ends. So they're a bit stiffer. They use those for barbecue brushes all the time. Don't tell anyone this. So if you want a really fat, wide brush for banging some stuff in, go to the dollar store and get a barbecue brush. They come in a pack of 3 for $2. Shh, edit that out. If Donis hears that, she'll kick me, right? So you can get cheap barbecue brushes work. So that works. So the butt hair, but those brushes have no flag tips. Your medium quality brushes have 70% butt hair, 30% inner ear hair. They're medium quality, but what they do is they take them in a bundle like this, and they have a little machine that goes and then moves along. And when it does this, it's called a force flag. It curls the end of the brush, and they curl and they get a flag, but the flag is kind of all curly. It's not pointy. So it's okay, it's a little better, but it's not good. These more expensive brushes have a flag tip on them. And why am I telling you that? So this has, I don't know, 6,000 hairs in it. Every one of these is flagged 2 or 3 times. I'm getting 18,000 hairs in this brush, and this brush will leave a very, very soft, beautiful mark. You don't get that with the synthetic brush. It leaves a stiff mark. It leaves a crisp, chunky, stiff mark. This will leave a very soft mark. You can pull those hairs apart and have a look at them, and you'll see that there's a flag tip on the end of that brush, which leaves a very soft mark.
So Doug, how do they get the hairs from the inner ear? I'm concerned about.
Well, usually they line up the pigs, they all give them a few shots of vodka, and pretty soon they're like, whoa, this is great, and then they just go in there. And no animals are harmed in making this video. I promise you. No, they just go in and shave them. They have pigs and they shave them. Yeah, that's what they do. And I'm pretty sure it grows back after a while. I'm not, you know, you always hear if you shave your leg, men shave their legs, it'll never grow back. Quit shaving, it's only going to come in heavier. Whatever, I don't think that's true.
Well, I know you're going to get there probably.
I am. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I want to do like, I want to get a lot of paint on my brush. I've got a lot of paint now, but I want a sharp line too.
Yes.
I want it to extend for a long time.
Yes.
What is the best brush?
You need a long, long, long-haired brush. So they make, you need an Egbert is what you need, right? Which is, we'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about, the longer the hair, the more it will hold the paint, the more it will release the paint.
Still use natural?
Yes, absolutely, because more paint will come off of it. Absolutely. Sorry. So go ahead for watercolor.
Yeah. What is the best brush? I don't like getting, because I think they actually kill the animal to get the hair.
They do in some cases, like in sable, you know. I don't know why when they cut off the tail they have to kill the animal, but I think it was more because they were using the fur for something else as well. So your sable brushes and your weasel brushes are getting harder and harder to find, and not because of that, but because they're on the endangered list and they can't just get them anymore. But sable is absolutely the best brush for watercolor. And yes, you have to close your eyes, but if you do and get a nice $100 sable brush, I've probably had mine for 25 years and it's still absolutely pristine condition and it's fantastic. Holds the most amount of water and releases the most amount of water that you can get for a brush. So for that $100 that I paid for my number 8 sable brush, I haven't had to buy a brush in 20 years. How much is that worth to me? A lot of money. And
Doesn't synthetic have those little barbs? Haven't they kind of created?
now they keep trying. They'll tell you some are softer, some are better. Some hold a little more water and a little less water, but nothing matches a natural hair brush. But here's something. For those of you that do gouache and paint in gouache, normally I would say to you, you need to buy, in watercolor, definitely buy a natural hair brush. Even a squirrel hair or a horsehair brush is better than a synthetic hair brush for watercolor. But in gouache, you don't want a natural hair brush, you want a synthetic brush. A natural hair brush with gouache will hold too much water and then make the gouache more like watercolor and it gets too runny. Too much water comes out. So a synthetic brush that doesn't hold a lot of water, doesn't release a lot of water, is perfect for gouache. And so when you paint in gouache, you can add more water and get it thinner and get a watercolor effect. But if you want more of an oil effect, a synthetic brush will do that in gouache. That's where a synthetic brush really shines, is with gouache.
What about if you're using alcohol ink? Which one's better for alcohol ink like this?
Yeah, so you're gonna probably be flowy and you're probably got a lot of loose lost edges. Synthetic brush is perfect for that. You're on usually a smooth surface. So smooth surface, synthetic brush, absolutely perfect. And that's where a synthetic brush will shine. If you want thin, loosey-goosey marks that don't have a lot of chunk to them, synthetic brushes will work for that. Okay? I forgot where I was. Any more questions while my brain tries to remember where I was going? Okay, so that's the difference. And like I said, I showed you all those brushes. Every one of those brushes is the same. Stiffer brushes leave chunkier marks. Softer brushes leave softer marks. But synthetic brushes do not release a lot of paint. Natural hair brushes release a ton of paint. So if you want chunky monkey, you got to go to natural hair. If you like thin and delicate, then you got to go to synthetic brushes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the surface of what you're painting on, for one. But before I get there, let me just do this, because this is kind of a backwards way of doing this. But here is this brush, right? Flag tip on the end, so you're getting 80 million little brushes all in one. But this hair, I want you to note that in the middle of it, a natural hair brush is hollow. It has a hole up the middle where the root goes, your follicle grows out, the root goes up, and it's hollow up in there. Hold that thought and remember that. That's coming up next, but it's important. But for now, let's go here and let's talk about, let me think about that. If I do that, I got to do it backwards. I have to do this backwards. I'm going to talk about this for a sec. Okay, hang on. Give me my brush back. Who's got my brush? I know you're all looking at it, but I need it back. I got to do it this way, or it's not going to work. Did he take that out of his back pocket? Yeah. I knew. See, you got to watch him. Okay. I know this is a little bit weird, but everybody has to come up here now. Sorry, you have to come up because that's the only way I can show you this. You got to kind of come up and gather around, and I'm going to show you this. Don't be afraid. Get right in here. You got to come and see. Oh yeah, and all the guys come up in the front, and then the other guys in the back can't see. I can probably do this twice for the guys at the back if you can't see. I can do it with any one of these brushes. But so when you're about to use your brush for the first time, this is a dry brush. I have not used it today. So this is what's called charging your brush. I'm about to save you a pail of money. So I don't know how many of you squish out your paint on your palette, and then you take your brush and you start mixing it up and going, oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then pretty soon you go, oh, I got no paint left. And you squeeze some more out, and then you mixing, oh, I got no paint. And then the third time you do it, you finally have paint. Why is that happening? It's because this brush is empty and not charged. So all of that paint is going into the brush. Until a natural hair brush is full of paint, it will not release paint. It will continue to absorb paint. Synthetic brushes don't do that. They just go on the outside and paint comes right off. No worries. This needs to be charged. So after it's charged, it's fine. But before you do that, watch what happens when I do this and I put this in here. Watch what happens. You see how that sucked all that paint up in there, or all that juice? Like I can do that with this brush here. Watch when I put this in. You see how that goes up in there? So if you take your thinner and then just tap this off, charge your brush with thinner, it's half the price of putting paint in it, right? So all of this brush is charged now. Now the paint just wants to sit on the outside, not the inside. And you'll notice if you don't do that and you mix, I finally get some paint. When you go to wash your brush, all the paint comes out and you're like, oh my God, well, a whole bunch of paint came out. And so if you have 5 brushes and you do that, every time you do that, you're literally using a ton of brush or using a ton of paint. So this now is charged and ready to go. You guys, can you see back there? You guys, okay. So you guys all move and I'm going to do this again. Everybody in the front. Thinner, just only synthetic. Synthetic will do it a very little bit. It just coats the outside. It does not go on the inside, okay? So you guys come up, make room, and you'll see. I'll put this brush in. I got lots of brushes, so don't worry.
Is that just water?
This is thinner for oil. This is Gamsol, yeah, for oil. It will do it for water too. So if you're in acrylic, do it for acrylic. Charge your brush with water, absolutely. Okay. So you'll see when I put this in. Watch. See how that sucked all that up? Normally that's paint going in there, which is a lot of money. This is nothing. You can. This will squeeze out. It's just Gamsol, and then you can tap it off. There's hardly anything in there, but this brush is charged, and now you won't have all that paint in there. And the first time you go to make a mark, you'll have a perfect mark. You won't have this big blob of paint or paint here, and it's all just trying to get that to work in the beginning. So that's one way to get your brushes to work early on in the beginning while you start. Because normally what happens is everybody keeps painting until you get 10, 15, 20 minutes into the painting before you got some sort of layers on there before things start to work for you and you're struggling. This will help that as well.
Do you fill up the big brush full all the way to you, let it suck right to the top?
Oh yeah, I would just go in here like this, right? Oh, I dip it right in there. Then I'll do this and I'll take the excess off because you'll see once the excess is off, look, there isn't much in there. But this brush is charged and ready to go now, and I will save a ton of paint.
So do you do it every time before you
Every time I start. Absolutely I do. Because like you use 4 or 5 brushes, 6 brushes when you go. Those 6 brushes, that's a chunk of paint every time. It doesn't come out till you clean your brush. So if you do that, the paint will come out right away. And you're not loading your paint with loading your brush with paint. You're loading with emptiness, And the paint will go on the outside and it works better.
You use acrylic, you use this solution? Is that-
No, that's just water. If you're in acrylic, do it with water because the natural hair brush will soak up water as well. Okay, so that's one thing that you can do. The next thing that you can do in acrylic and oil, it doesn't matter. So the surface that you're painting on, depending on your surface. So in the case where I paint on either linen or canvas, which I paint on, all of the canvases, and especially gesso boards, now if you buy flat gesso boards, I mean, if you're in watercolor, a little bit different. If you're in, and you're using Yupo paper, that's all fine. Every substrate is a little bit different. But canvas especially, the canvas that we're getting now, 10 years ago, canvas was almost exclusively made with an oil egg emulsion that was a gesso that was beautiful to paint on. You could just slather the paint on it, it was beautiful. And since I think the last company now, Fredericks, was bought out, they don't even make oil egg emulsion anymore. Everybody's using acrylic gesso, and the calcium carbonate content in there is extremely high now. It's filler. They're putting filler in there to cut the cost. Is it primed? Yes, it's beautifully primed. Is it double primed? Yes, it's beautifully double primed. Is the priming beautiful? No, it sucks beyond belief. It's terrible to paint on. I hate it. But here's at least one solution for that. You charge your brush, you must charge the canvas as well. So the paint will get accepted on there. So a lot of the blame for stuff on here comes down to the brush going, my brush sucks. I hate this brush. This brush isn't working. It's not your brush's fault. It's these guys' fault, and we're going to fix that. So once you charge your brush like this and you dip it in, then you're going to charge your canvas. And you put either water if you're in acrylic or Gamsol if you're in oil. And you put a coat on like that, and you just lightly wipe that coat back. And then you leave it for a couple of minutes to soak in. And what happens is this thinner or water will soak into the gesso and it opens up the pores of the gesso and allows the paint to get absorbed into the canvas. If you don't, this is what happens.
So it's true on canvases with acrylic paint too.
Yeah. So if you're painting with acrylic, put water on there because this is what happens. Doesn't matter if it's oil or acrylic. I happen to have oil here. So you see how dry and skippy that is there? All right. So I've charged this side, and if I do this, I get a much better, that hasn't absorbed in yet, I can tell, but I get a better lay of paint with that than I do with that.
I'm gonna have lots of questions for you.
It's all good.
What about if you're using wood?
Same thing. You're probably going to want to open up the pores of the wood. So if you're using wood, are you painting in acrylic?
Yes.
You can paint directly in acrylic on wood. I, however, still would seal the wood because of what they call SIDS or whatever, which is surface-induced discoloration.
Yeah.
So sometimes the yellow of the wood will leach out into your paint and change it. So I would always put matte medium on there. And if you put matte medium on, then I would charge it with water too because matte medium is very dry.
What about clear gesso?
Even worse. That's the worst thing on the planet. I love clear gesso because it's clear and it'll coat it, but it's like matte medium. It's the same. It's super dry. You absolutely have to put water on there or you're going to be in trouble.
Okay.
Right? So here, right now, look at this. I can make a way better mark. That's starting to, you can see how much more it's already opened up. Since I left it another minute, it's opened up. So I can get better coverage with that in the beginning. So you charge your brush, saves you money. Filling this up and charging your canvas will allow the paint to go on more readily and you won't fight it in the beginning. You'll get your large shapes and your large colors in the background will work much nicer. Right? Look, that just wants to go on now. If I go over here, look at the difference. I can't even get that to go on compared to that. Yes?
Just on the acrylic side, so you put the water on and then you rub it off and you can let it dry and it'll still absorb. Is that right?
For the most part, yes. It still opens up the pores of the canvas. I would probably hit it again if it's really dry. Like you got about 5 minutes, and then, you probably got 10, 15 minutes you could do it. But after 10 minutes, I'd probably hit it with a little bit of water again to see what happens. Like you're right, because sometimes you get busy doing something and you forget, oh, it's already dry. But it won't dry out that much, in a day for sure you'd have to. But yeah.
So if you leave it painting for a few days and go back to acrylic, you should wet it down again?
No, if you've got a layer of paint on, you don't have to worry. It's just that the calcium carbonate that's in here it's drier than the Gobi Desert, right? And it just wants to suck water. It wants to suck everything in. So here, it repels the paint. It just goes, I don't like it. There's no moisture in it, right? It wants moisture. And sometimes your paint doesn't have enough moisture in it to go in. If you open, it just opens the pores up and the paint just flows right in there.
So I'm gonna use a liquid white, am I still gonna do this before, or?
I would do that before and then put your liquid white on, because your liquid white's going to skip on there, and you get the liquid white on. Now you're going to get the full effect of using liquid white on there. Yes.
So if you do an oil with a large canvas, do you charge the whole canvas?
I do.
But then if you don't get it all done, like you don't get all
I sometimes have to go back and recharge. Yeah. Yeah. Like I say, usually I got 15, 20 minutes before I've got to, it does tend to absorb in and dry out a little bit. And if you do it again, you probably need less water. And then I say, like, I pour on a lot. Depends on what I'm doing. Sometimes I actually have a dollar store mister bottle, a little red mister bottle, and I just take it and I spritz it on. And then I go and I get my paints ready and I do a bunch of stuff. But usually, like, if you have too much on there, you'll see if there's too much, you'll put this on and it'll start running. And you'll go, oh, I got way too much on there.
So do you charge for oil? Do you charge with water?
No, with Gamsol, with OMS or whatever you're using, odorless mineral spirits.
So you put Gamsol in your Mr. bottle?
I do. I do. Don't confuse it with your hairspray. Your hair gets this glistening look, but it stinks. So. No, I do. I just have a little red bottle downstairs, and I put it in, and I missed it. It's way easier than getting. I mean, you could charge your brush, but I never know what brush I'm using, so I just take the canvas and I spritz it, and then I lay my paints out, and I have a TV that I use to paint from, so I get my subject matter up there and do whatever, and that sits there for 5 minutes, and she's good to go. Right? I forget what else. What else? Ask more questions. I forget what I was talking about now. Yeah, so this is good. Always charging stuff. It just, because everybody blames my brush sucks. It's skippy and I don't like my brush. It's sometimes not the brush's fault. It's sometimes what you're doing with it, right? So, yeah, let me just go here because I did write everything down. Let's see what I'm missing here. We haven't talked about that. Okay, that's good. All right. Hey, Ryan, can you do me a favor? Just grab me another little piece of canvas. I knew I shouldn't have made a big piece like this because I used it all up and I need another little piece. Just cut it off the roll, the rest of it. He's going to get another, but I'll talk about real quick brush shapes because there's only 4 or 5 brush shapes that you have. Okay, so there's round brushes, which are, little pointy brushes like this. They're fantastic for detail. I only use them for detail, right? But a little round brush is good. I didn't pull out a liner brush, but anybody that I'll tell you, here's the difference between a rigger brush and a liner brush, if anyone wants to know. There are two. They don't really sell rigger brushes anymore. I can't find them anymore, but a rigger brush was like, a liner brush, the hairs are like really long on them. They're really tiny and the hairs are long on them, right? It's for doing telephone pole lines, fence lines, twigs, branches, and any of that kind of stuff. They're pointy. A rigger brush had a square end on it. And it was called a rigger brush because they were made for guys that used to paint boat paintings and do rigging on boats. And they were square because you needed certain sizes to do that, whereas the round brush always gives you a thin line. The rigger brush gave you a square one. So sometimes people say, oh, do you have a rigger brush? That's a liner brush now. It's all the same. So. Whoops. There you go. Perfect.
So I have a question, Doug. If you charge your canvas and then tone it in a single color,
if you tone your canvas, you don't have to charge it. Once you've toned your canvas, there is enough paint on there that it should be fine to go now, right? So toning and charging would be kind of the same thing, right? Okay, so that's a liner brush, and pointy brushes, we all get it, good for detail. Pointy brushes are good for detail. Then there's two other kinds of brushes, and I have these two here. So what they have now is called a flat and a bright. The difference between a flat and a bright brush is a flat has long hair. A bright has short, chunky hair. You need an Egbert, which is even longer. So if you want to do really long brush marks, you can buy something called an Egbert. Jack Rich's, and we sell them out there. They're called Egbert brushes. They're super long. They hold, the longer the brush, the more paint it will hold, the more paint will come off. Thus, brights make short, choppy, chunky marks. If you like chunky, squared off, very direct, harsh marks, a bright is your best friend. If you like softer brush marks, really soft, less edgy brush marks, then a flat is going to be your best friend.
But the paint, if it is up towards the metal part, then how are you going to get it down to where it's coming off?
That is a fantastic question. I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm just borrowing this for a sec. And I'm just going to borrow one of these. I shouldn't be showing you this. This is El Savo Cheapo Painto method number 2. Okay, before I go there, the reason you get a liner brush and have long hairs on a liner brush is because a pointy brush will do this. A liner brush will do this. And you can see how that skips there because I have not charged this canvas, so you can see that. But this is why you get a liner brush, is because it holds enough paint that if you want to make telephone lines on there, you can. You can do that. It'll make a long line and the paint will not run out. So a pointy brush will not do that. It'll run out too fast, right? So that's your liner brush. Before I get to the filbert, the question was, how do you get, you've got your brushes all loaded and you've been painting with it for a while and you've got a boatload of paint in the brush. 2 methods. The first method is on your palette when you're mixing up your paint. I'm just going to tighten that up a little. When you're mixing up your paint like this on your palette, roll the brush over and squish it. You see those blobs of paint right there coming out? You can actually squish the paint out and you will get more paint. So that's one way. Learning how to do this, when I mix my paint, you'll always see I flip it over and I roll it and I'm squeezing the paint out of the brush to get it to come out so that I'm always getting more paint out of it. Eventually that won't work anymore. So your palette knife becomes your best friend because I do this. I take my palette knife and I literally squeeze the paint out of the brush and I get a big blob of paint on the end and I can do this. I can pick that up and I can paint with that and make a mark with it. So I squeeze that paint out all the time. I'm cheap, sorry. Maybe I'm poor, maybe that's what it is. Oh, you should buy a painting, I'm poor. That's what it is.
Sometimes I find when the oil paint comes out, it's very firm. It's really hard to soften up.
Yes, so that's a matter of, depends on the brand you buy. If you buy Graham paint, super smooth and it's lovely to paint with. If you buy Gamblin paint, super chunky monkey. It's dry and chunky. And some people love dry, chunky paint because they like to get thick, heavy brush marks on. I like it creamy and in a nice consistency. Rembrandt's in between that. So that's a brand issue, not really a paint issue. It's also a color issue. Earth tones are always going to be a little more chunky, and your CADs and your dye-based colors are always going to be more smooth. So each color has a consistency unto its own, but each manufacturer will also have a consistency of paint. So I happen to like the Graham paint for a couple of reasons, for 3 reasons. One, it's the strongest paint that I found. It's the least expensive paint that I found, and it's creamy, and I want my paint creamy already so I can get my brush marks on right away. I don't have to fight with it. Nothing worse for me than Gamblin' White, which is chunky monkey, and I get it, and I have to put medium in it, and I have to put a little thinner in it, and I have to get it to the consistency I want it. That's just work, and I paint very fast. I don't want to do that work, right? Okay, so back to the brushes. So we talked about rounds, detail, talked about a liner brush. We talked about brights. So brights will make short, like if I'm doing this, brights do this. They make these short, chunky little marks, whereas a flat will make a longer, more smoothie. It still might have a little bit of an edge to it. When they're brand new, they will make this little edgy thing. And so what happens is people go, well, that's a pretty square mark. Like, I don't know if I like that chunky square mark. So then they'll go and they'll buy a filbert, which has the lovely tapered ends on it. Absolutely beautiful, because that does not make a chunky square mark. But this is the biggest ripoff in art history. Right here. Mr. Filbert, who invented this, is sitting somewhere in his fancy car, driving around going, they're still buying my brush. Yeah, I got lots of money. All right? So it will make a softer mark, but you will notice that your flat, when you buy a nice flat brush with good hairs, after about 2 paintings, the edges curl in anyways, and you'll get a softer edge with it, and they're fine. The reason I don't like a filbert brush is for this reason. Both these brushes are $14.95. They're exactly the same price. Why? Because they're both a number 12. And at the base of the brush, they're exactly the same size. But the tip of this brush does this. It makes this mark right there. This brush makes this mark right there. So you've paid the same amount of money for a brush that makes half the size. Why don't you just buy a flat, I don't have one here, but if I had a flat number 6 would make that mark. So why aren't you just buying a number 6? Filberts are a waste of money. They make small marks and they charge you top dollar for them because of the edge that's there. This will turn into a filbert in 2 paintings, I guarantee you. So don't ever waste your money on filberts. I know we'll never sell another filbert brush again, but whatever. I don't care. Mr. Filbert's going to run out of money someday. Good for him. I don't like that guy. Right? So I think this is a complete waste of money, right? This is making a number 6 mark when you're paying for a number 12 brush. So no more filberties. All right, more questions? Not all at once.
You can turn the brush a little bit.
Yeah, we're getting there. Don't be jumping ahead.
Flat brush will turn into a filbert in a couple of things.
Yeah, that's yeah.
You don't want to do it, like you want to keep it flat.
Then you got to buy new ones and keep them that way. And you know, they'll slowly turn into filberts. And at a certain point, my brushes go from, you know, early stages of painting to throughout the painting to, oh, it's a scrubber brush now. I'm just going to bang in the background with this brush, right? Because it's not the greatest shape anymore, but I'm making inert shapes anyway, so I don't care. You know, when I want a really crisp one, I use a new brush. When I'm in the middle and want soft edges, I'll use all my regular brushes. So I know what stage they're at, right? And yes, eventually a brush dies. It does have a slow, you know, life to it, and it will eventually die. And you'll notice that, because the next thing after I get to this, my next brush lesson, we'll get to the fact about cleaning your brushes and why they're dying on you faster than they should. Okay, so painting wise, yeah, can't you turn your brush? So this is kind of a little bit of my favorite too, is that people don't realize that this brush that I have right here will do a whole bunch of things. And I always liken it to, and I can never find the video, but when I did this online years ago, I showed a video of Connor McDavid, the hockey player from the Oilers, scoring a goal. And he goes in and he goes around these 2 players, and then he does a 360, puts the puck between his legs, flips the puck up on his stick, and throws it in the net. And you look at that and go, good God, the puck control this guy has, and he's moving at a fairly fast clip with two guys hugging him, trying to take the puck away from him, and he gets between them and still puts it in the net. And you watch what he does with his stick. Well, I tried to liken that to how you need to handle a paintbrush. It's the same thing. Everybody does this. La-dee-da-dee-da. Right? Well, that's wonderful. Ain't going to score any goals with that. Okay? So you have to remember that this brush, you have to remember that this brush will not only go down, but it will come up as well. So you can make two different brush marks just like that. This will go this way. This will go this way. This brush will go this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way. So I have 360 degrees that this brush will go. So you got to think about that when you're doing it. What's the best way to handle this brush, and what kind of mark can I make by turning this brush around? Okay? Not only that, you now have 180 degrees to take this brush from there to there before it goes back, and that's 300, well, I guess that's 180 degrees there, but whatever, 90 degrees then, I don't know. I'm not a math, right? Just remember, 4 out of 3 people struggle with math. All right, so anyways, you can turn it on its side. So you not only have all of this, you can turn this on its side. So I can make that brush mark there. I can make that brush mark there. I can make that brush mark there. I can make that, and I can make that. All with the same brush. And people ask, God, you always use such a big brush. I'm like, well, I always use a number 12. Why? Because I can make all of those marks with a number 12, so why do I need to change my brush? If I'm changing the angle I'm using it, which then says to me that I can do this, I can go, oh, I want this mark, and I want a little mark to come off, and another mark like this, and I want one to come out here, and I want one to do that, and one to do that. I can make a whole ton of brush marks with one brush because I know how to handle this brush. I'm not setting it down, picking up another brush every single time to do that. Every time you stop painting, put the brush down, pick up another brush. You're flipping from the right-hand side of your brain, the creative side, to the left-hand side, and the left-hand side's starting to pick this up, and then the creative side goes, okay, we got to learn how to use this brush now, and whatever. It gets very confusing. The longer you can hold one brush and the less you have to think about it, the better off you're going to be painting. And you'll get used to holding your brush. Look at golfers. I mean, they can do amazing things with one club and make things go all over the place. So that's a little bit about that. Now, I'm going to teach you one other thing about, this is a little bit less about actual physical brushes and a little bit about more helping you get better, cleaner marks when you paint. You guys are all so young in this room. Does anybody remember Lawrence Welk? No. Right? Yeah, 3 people. I'm getting so old, no one even gets my references anymore. When I was a kid, my parents would watch Lawrence Welk, right? This crazy polka band leader. He had a show at night, and he would do this. He was, I don't know, Lithuanian or whatever he was, and he would go, good evening, tonight's a show. We're going to have the beautiful singing of Bobby's going to sing, and Valerie will back up. But first, we're going to have the band, and we're going to play this song. And he'd go, ready? 1, 2, 3. And then Bubbles would show up, and they'd play this polka music, and it was, it was the hokiest show ever. But it was that 1, 2, 3. So this is what I call my Lawrence Welk method of painting. If you adopt this method of painting and get it in your brain, you will get cleaner, crisper, fresher brush marks. So what that is no more ever than 3 brush marks on your canvas without going back to the paint. So basically it's this: 1, 2, 3, back to the paint. 1, 2, 3, back to the paint. 1, 2, 3. Back to the paint. 1, 2, back to the paint. 1, 2, back to the paint. 1, back to the paint. 1, 2, 3. So you can do any number you want up to 3. Any more than 3, if you don't go back to the paint, what you're going to do now is go, you see how all crisp these are? You go 1, 2, 3, and then you start doing this, and pretty soon you get no crisp brush marks, you get smushy marks. It gets smushy because you're overworking the brush mark. The whole idea behind the brush is it picks up paint, it releases paint and leaves a mark on the canvas that's a readable thing. It's like a note in music. It's readable. You read that brush mark. If you annihilate that brush mark, there's no read to it anymore. So now you need detail to get a read, which means you're going to get in there and start farting around with your painting, and pretty soon you're going to be, oh, God, I liked it way before. I've overworked this thing. And that's because you're putting far too many brush marks on. 1, 2, 3. No more than 3 brush marks back to the paint. I don't care if you do this and go 1, 2. I don't care if you take 1 and do this and go 1. I have not lifted my brush and I soften the edge. Once the brush comes off the canvas, that is a brush mark. No more than 3 brush marks. I don't care if you do this and go 1, 2, 3, and then you can go into your water or your thinner or whatever you're using to clean your brush. You can wipe off the brush, pick up another color, and then hit it and go 1, 2, 3. But if you're going back to the paint or back to the thinner, you need to be cleaning your brush all the time, and you need to be making no more than 3 brush marks. Now, eventually you'll get to a point where you can make more than 3 brush marks and a little bit here and tweak the edges and stuff. But until you get used to the 3 brush mark thing, you'll overwork your paint. So I try heavily to tell people, don't overwork it, leave those brush marks. So that's the idea as well. 1, 2, 3. And when you make a few brush marks, you come back here, and now you look at your painting from back here. You don't look at it from up here, because up here, those 3 brush marks look chunky monkey, and they look very direct, and they have no harmony to them. But you stand back there, and they look good. I used to think when I went to the museum, and they had that little rope there, it was so you didn't get too close to the painting and breathe on it, and you wouldn't touch it or anything. I realize now that rope's there, so you're an idiot. Stand back and look at the painting. Don't get all up in the face of the painting. You can't tell what's going on. And then, of course, me, I want to see what goes on, so I get in there. Beep, 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 beep. Oh, my God, the security guards are right there. No, stand back from your painting and see how that reads. You'll get used to the read that you have here, and you'll know what it's supposed to look like there, and you'll start leaving those brush marks alone. So you'll now have a brush that loads with paint. You have a canvas that's willing to accept paint. You have a brush that's going to release paint. You're not going to overwork the brush mark, and you're going to get some really clean, crisp brush marks. And now you're allowed to go pour yourself a vodka because you've had a great day painting. You're going to have a drink. No, you got to clean your brush. Yeah, no vodka. You've got to clean your brush. And so, for a lot of you, I don't know how much you paint, but for guys like Brian and I who paint way too much, this is how I clean my brushes. Right there, I'm done. So you ask Ryan or ask anybody in my house. I have the same bucket that's outside there by the sink. We have a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket full of Gamsol through OMS, odorless mineral spirits, and my brushes sit in there. 365, 24/7, all the time. They just sit in there. I don't care. They just sit in there. They're not heavy enough that I'm going to bend the bristles. If it was a watercolor brush, maybe I wouldn't do that because they can bend the tip on them, but these aren't heavy enough. So this just sits in there like this in my turp pot all day, every day, all year, and nothing ever happens to it.
Would that be the same for an acrylic brush?
Yep.
Leaving it in water?
Leave it in the water. You can if you want. If you paint it, I mean, look, if you're not going to paint and the water evaporates or whatever. The other thing you can do if you're worried about the tips and have some delicate brushes, get a paint tray, a little red roller, you know, the roller paint trays. They're slanted. Set your brushes in there so the tips are just in the water and leave them there. Okay? That's the cheap way of doing it.
I thought the water went up to where the bristles are held in.
Yeah.
And it would loosen the bristles and they would fall out.
No, if water's going to loosen the bristles, they'd all fall out when you painted because you're getting water on there anyway. So, no, I've never had a problem with that ever. So, but I paint all the time. So almost every day I paint. And I know it sounds a little facetious. Really? Do you paint every day? I actually do. Yeah, I do. I'm pretty diligent about getting my ass out of bed in the morning and painting. And if I'm not, I'm drawing or I'm doing something. And then there's days I can't. So I'll put them in a bucket and put a lid on it and they'll just sit in there. If I'm gone for, like, I'm going to Mexico to teach for a month, I'll pull them out, wipe them off, and I put them in a plastic bag and I just leave them. So for the rest of you that need to, if you only paint once a week, I would then clean your brushes, which means you need 2 terp pots. You need this terp pot or thinner or water that you clean in. And when you're finished cleaning that and most of the pigment has left the brush, you want to dip it in fresh water. Do not leave it with the dirty water on the brush because that's what makes your brush crusty, right? You think you've cleaned it and then you go back and it's kind of stiff and crusty. That's because you're cleaning it in dirty water and that water is drying on there. The paint, once the water evaporates, the pigment's left on there, it's making the brush crusty. So always the last thing you should do is dip your brush in fresh water or fresh Gamsol that's pure and just leave it. You're gonna be fine. If you have synthetic brushes, room temperature water or cold water only. Never use hot water. We'll never use hot water in any brush anyways. Should be tepid water, but especially these black-haired brushes like this, they do not like hot water at all. They knurl at the end if you put them in hot water. And people get scalding hot water to clean their brushes. Don't do that. Should be room temperature. You don't need hot water to clean them. The other thing is all synthetic brushes are fantastic. Some people really like these black-haired brushes because they're stiffer and they make some wonderful background marks. But these black-haired brushes, this is a Catalyst brand. There is another brand that has black hair. Do not put these in thinner at all. It melts the ends of them or something. I don't know what happens, but that's just one thing I know. These black-haired brushes do not like thinner whatsoever. They all kind of splay at the end and people come, what's wrong with my brush? I just bought it. I said, you're an oil painter. Yes. I'm like, I don't know why, but they do that. So it's just the black-haired ones. So the other thing is when you're cleaning your brush too, if you need to clean your brush and leave it, the most important thing to clean is down at the ferrule, right at the base of this brush right here. So what usually happens for people is they do this, the pigment's all out, yay, my brush is done. And then after about 4, 5, 6, 7 uses, your brush starts to get really stiff and it gets really stiff up here and it's hard to use. It's because you haven't washed the paint out of the ferrule and it's creeping up the end of the brush and it's choking the brush. So you've choked this much of the brush. This is where all the flexibility is. See where it wants to bend? You've cut that out. So now there's no room for this brush to bend. So it gets very stiff. So you have to get in there and do this. Go right to the ferrule and push on that and get that paint out of the ferrule. If you don't, your brush is going to get dry and crusty and you're going to be wanting to buy new brushes. I'm saving you money here. Are you listening? Pay attention. I'm saving you money. Get in the ferrule and clean that ferrule out and reshape your brush at the end. So I always try to shape my brushes at the end if I've cleaned them and bring them back to shape. So for those of you, for those of you in acrylic that are using bristle brushes, when you use a bristle brush with acrylic, they work fantastic. But you're using water because of the hollow nature of the hair. That brush after a while will bloat. It fills full of water and it puffs up and it bloats and it loses its shape. It will go back to shape when it's dry, but it doesn't really like water. It will work with water. So a tip for you, if you're using the bristle brush with acrylic to get a lot of paint on your canvas, don't leave it in the water. Keep it out of the water. Right? And make sure it's either in a wet paper towel or something so it's not drying, but you want to keep it out of the water, otherwise it'll bloat. It will go back to shape after. If you wash a bristle brush, a hog bristle brush in hot water, it knurls. It does this, it dries and does that. And you get this little curl in there and you'll be like, no, I hate that little thing. It leaves a weird mark. I don't like that. Right? So that's because you're using hot water. But if you need to fix a brush, if any of your flat brushes, any of your round brushes need fixing, here's a couple tips for you. The first is I wash my brushes, clean them out, soap and water. I take a deck of playing cards, I rip the playing card in half, I fold it over onto here, and I put a paper clip on it, and I let it dry. It'll pull your brushes right back to shape again. So you just want to flatten them out. So I put a card on there, I put a paper clip on there, I let it dry, brand spanking new, I swear to God, it works great. If you have round brushes like this, and you happen to leave them in the water because you were in the middle of painting, and your buddy Brian called and said, dude, come on, we're going to the bar, we're going drinking. I'm like, oh, I'm in, woo! And then your brush has been sitting in the water all day and it's done that, and it's bent like that. You can take this brush now and put it over a steamer, put it over your kettle, and you steam it. Just warm it up till it gets all floppy, right? And then what you do is you take 3 tablespoons of sugar in a cup of water, stir it up so it's all liquid, so it's just liquid sugar, and you dip this brush in liquid sugar water and just set it on your counter, nice and you shape it, dip it in the water, and let it dry. That'll dry crusty hard. That sugar water, it dries crusty hard, and it trains the brush to go back to the way it was. As soon as you wash the sugar water out, your brush is perfect again. So you can get rid of all those little knurls and all those little curls in the end of the brush, and you can bring them right back to shape again. And they're going to help you save a lot of money and rectify some of your brushes. Right? We do sell, for those of you that don't get the stuff out of the bottom of your brush here, we do sell that Winsor Newton brush cleaner that we have out there. I highly recommend it. It will bring your brushes back to about 80 or 90% new. It will not fix them perfectly, but if you have a brush that's about to hit the garbage bin, you can put it in there, and I leave it in for a couple of hours in that solution, and then I wash it in tepid water, and you'll get your brush back to 90%. All right, so now I've fixed your brushes. I've taught you how to paint. I've taught you every brush you need. What else do you need?
Fan brushes.
Cheering, yay, that's my favorite fan. They're okay. If you like a fan brush, so I don't use a fan brush. I find it a little bit annoying. Like, you can do anything with a bristle brush that a fan brush will do. This is where a big fat acrylic brush like this, these XL brushes like this, which are cheap, like this brush is probably only 20 bucks. And maybe not even, this is probably 13, but the big fat ones are even better than a fan brush. But now, my buddy that I paint with all the time, John Einerson, Land, Sea, and Sky Workshop, he couldn't live without his fan brush. He absolutely loves it. And he's got 100, and he's like, with his fan brush all day long. Man, he knows how to make that work. Nothing wrong with a fan brush, but I'm going to tell you, if you want super soft edges, then you buy a synthetic fan brush. If you want a little bit more chunky edges to your clouds, where there's still a bit of meat to the cloud and not just so soft, then get a bristle fan brush, right? Bristle fan brush will leave marks. A synthetic fan brush will leave no marks. So they're good for whichever.
For people who are trying to use oil, but going more natural and cleaning your brush without solvent, what would be the best way to do that?
For oil?
Yeah.
Like water-soluble oils?
Well, not even that. Can you use oils and clean in a natural way your brush?
Oh yeah, lots of guys. So like the guy who used to teach here, Chris Jordan, and there's a bunch of them that used to, I'm not sure where he is now, but Robert Wood, who used to teach here, he's in Kelowna now. None of them use any solvents whatsoever. They are usually just they're cleaning their brushes in linseed oil and leaving it in the oil all the time. You don't have to use thinner if you don't want. Now, just because I'm who I am, and I don't think anything can poison me at this point, the mineral spirits that we're using now today, even from 10 years ago, are 10 times as clean or cleaner than they were 10 years ago, which is 100 times cleaner than they were 20 years ago. This OMS that I'm using here is probably less harmful than any detergent and crap that's under your kitchen sink that you're using to clean some stuff that you clean your toilet with now. But if you still don't like it, you can use any oil will clean your brush. You can just clean it. Robert Wood just uses walnut oil. And then he has a paint tray and he leaves his brushes in the walnut oil all the time. Never cleans it out of the walnut oil. So you're fine to do that. Speaking of which, if you are out painting or on an extended thing where you need to keep your paint itself moist and want to keep your brushes moist while you're painting, like I go away for a week at a time outdoor painting, the one thing you can do is buy one of those little Masterson Stay Wet palettes, which is great for acrylic, but for oil, if you buy clove oil will stop your paint from drying. You put clove oil in there and your paint will not dry.
Where do you put it? Like, you mix it into the paint, or you put it in?
Just a little jar of it inside the box and you just leave it. And for some reason, it does not dry. You don't even need to put it in the paint. You can just keep it there. So even at home, I mean, you can take your paint and I used to say this, oh, put your paint in the freezer. And I was like, oh God, don't put your paint in the freezer. That's so stupid, because you pull it out and then there's all these ice crystals on it and there's water in there and it gets really gooey. Well, that was when I had a Frigidaire fridge from 1960. We don't have any fridges now that are not frost free. You can put your paint in the freezer and freeze it and nothing will happen to it for oil paint, right? So, but clove oil, I don't know what it does, is you just put a little jar and put it in the pallet, close the lid of the pallet, and 2 months from now, that paint's perfect. It's like crazy, yeah. I don't know what's in clove oil that does that.
What's the brand of your sable brush that you said you got from the Japanese manufacturer?
Oh, the HJ, the blue-haired, I don't know, they're called Heinz Jordan brushes. So Heinz Jordan is a wholesaler out of Toronto that's been around forever, and the Heinz comes from Heinz Ketchup. At one time, it was a subsidiary of Heinz Ketchup, and they branched out, and somebody bought that part, and the Heinz guy met some Jordan guy, I don't know. But it was part of the Heinz Ketchup family at one time, so that's kind of weird. But it's just, it's weird because they're the only company that sells them, and this brush manufacturer only sells these brushes to them, and another manufacturer in England sells them under a different brand name in England, and he only manufactures for the two people. And he makes the most killer brushes. They're really, really good.
You ever have your thinner and your spirit, so you put the, like, two different things together? Cause any problem, like a thinner or a Gamsol or a mineral spirits or like a terp or anything? Like,
Well, I don't use terp. The only time I use terp is if I'm painting outside and I'm doing a larger painting. I'll use terp because it evaporates and dries really fast, and I love it. But I wouldn't use it inside. It's way too stinky.
otherwise I can just put different kinds together?
Yeah, all the OMS things are all the same. They're all the same stuff. Yeah.
You don't have to throw it out and fill it all up
No.
with different, okay. Thank you.
Heard about bamboo brushes. Would that be considered natural?
Say that again.
Bamboo.
Bamboo brushes. Yes.
That's wood, so it's not hair, but it's not.
No, the hair is usually camel hair, but it's a bamboo handle. The handle's bamboo. Sure, you can make your handles out of anything. I don't care what you make it out of. You can make it out of tuna cans. I don't care. But the hair that's on there, that's usually on a bamboo brush. That's camel hair, and it's floppy. And the reason they're floppy is because they're mainly used for Chinese brush painting that have lots of swirly lines, and they're very calligraphic. So that brush will flow when you twist and turn it. It wants to do that with you. Whereas these synthetics, don't want to do that.
How much Gamsol do you have in your turp pot?
4 ounces. I don't know. Whatever that holds. I have no idea. You wonder why I'm such a bad cook. I don't know. Throw some of that in. What does it taste like? It needs more vodka. Whatever. I don't know. There's all different sizes of those. The guy that makes these pots, the company that makes these, has never painted a day in their lives because they have no idea how big a brush is. Because you can't buy these tall enough that the brushes don't fall out. It's really annoying. I keep thinking, we're going to make these and make them tall. I'm going to sell millions of them because they hold a brush. Even the bigger ones, they make them bigger and they're deeper, but the thing they put in there, the brush still sticks out and they all flip out. It's really annoying.
So basically, you don't want the tip of the brush to touch the bottom.
Yeah, oh yeah, it touches. Yeah, but look at. When I set this down like this, that's not doing anything. It's not heavy enough to do anything. And now it's in water, so it wants to float, or in a liquid. It wants to float a little bit. It's never going to hurt it. It can just sit in there. If you're worried about that, as I say, get a red paint tray, the little roller trays, and you can just set the tip in, will sit on that angle, and it'll just sit in there. Yeah.
You have to make sure that the amount of liquid inside is covering the whole bristle.
No, as I say, it soaks into it. No, but don't leave it so, like I've done that, where I've only had this much liquid in there, and then I go away for a week, and it will evaporate, and I don't even put a lid on mine. I come back, and it's evaporated, and now the brush is stuck to the bottom of the pot, and I'm like, oh, I'm so annoyed that I did that. I get really annoyed when I ruin brushes for no reason, right? And don't be lazy when you go outside and paint and wrap your brushes in a piece of plastic or a piece of paper towel and go, I'm going for beer now. I'll get back to these brushes. And then a week later you go, no, I forgot. And they're dry and crusty and you've ruined brushes. It's too late. Well, you can use the Winsor & brush cleaner to a certain extent. We'll get them back, but they're never quite as good. And it's always me in a big fat brush like this that gets ruined. And I go, I've ruined a $30 brush just because I'm lazy, right? All right, any more questions?
You started talking about natural hair that it's hollow inside, then you said to keep that top, like on the board.
Yes?
And you haven't finished, you moved to the canvas painting, and you said to hold that thought. So
Oh, I did it. I did. That's where the liquid soaks up into the brush. Because it's hollow, it'll soak into there. I was going to wet that first and talk about wetting that, and then I realized I have to charge my brush first. So anyways, yeah, they're hollow and it'll soak up. The bristle brushes will soak that up. It just saves you paint. You don't have to do that. It just saves you a whole bunch of paint. It makes the paint flow off the brush for the first few brush marks way easier.
I have a question about, say I do a half a painting, a landscape, like a wet on wet, and then I'm tired and I go to bed. And then next week I want to finish it. Can I just do some liquid clear?
Yes, that's what liquid clear is for. So it's called oiling out your canvas. So nothing wrong with, like I'm an alla prima painter, so I paint pretty much everything at once. I'll do 90% of my painting in one sitting. Right? But yeah, but if you're slower and you wait and then you go back, you're going to paint again in a week and the paint's dry, what you need to do is what's called oiling it out. So take linseed oil or liquid clear, if you're doing that, and just put a thin layer of oil on your canvas. Really thin, wipe the excess off. What it does is it creates a wet surface so you're painting on the same surface you were when you left the painting.
Walnut as well? Or
Walnut oil, linseed oil, any oil that you're putting on. It just creates a surface conducive to what you're used to from when you were painting before. You're painting wet into wet again now, not dry into wet. So it's just called oiling out.
What brush would you recommend for blending sky?
For blending skies, one of these in big. The one at these XL brushes, the big, no, these are synthetic. Yeah, but I take that brush and I use my bristle brush and I literally bang that sky in pretty heavy. It's pretty thick. And then I take that brush and I do this with it all over because it's big and it's soft and it just knocks everything back and it's absolutely beautiful. You got to dip it and clean it a little bit and wipe it off and then go back and do it again and go over top. They just work. That's what a synthetic brush does the best of, is soft edges. Yeah.
is what you said to her just for oil painting, the linseed oil?
Yes.
Or is there acrylic equivalent?
No, because the acrylic dries, so I guess it would depend on how you paint. If you're used to painting wet into wet with acrylic, which is tough to do anyways, but if you're a very fast painter and do that, then I would take gloss medium and put gloss medium over it. But otherwise, for the most part, for acrylic, you're probably painting wet into dry all the time anyways, so it doesn't matter.
Can you talk about a little bit about the different animal hairs and which one is best for what?
Well, so sable is expensive, but it's stiff. So it holds its shape and it's very crisp and snappy and it doesn't flop around a lot. So it's great for detail, and sable holds a boatload of water and will release a boatload of water. All the other ones, horse, camel, all of those, squirrel hair, they're all floppy, right? And they're cheap alternatives to sable, but they're floppy. So you won't get a crisp line with them. Right? Nothing wrong with a synthetic pointy brush for watercolor. It's just that they don't hold a lot of water. So you'll make a minimum sized mark with it. The benefit of having a sable brush is if you're doing a sky and want to paint clouds, the brush will keep going. You don't have to go back to the water to go, dip in, and you can keep going with it. So it's all a matter of how much it holds versus how much it releases. And with watercolor, if you paint like I do, wet into wet, where there's lots of loosey juicy stuff going on, then I want a brush that holds a ton of water because I don't want to have to keep going back. And as you know, every time, when you do, a lot of times, especially in watercolor too, I don't know if I can make this happen, but when you paint like this and you make a mark and you pull your brush off, see, it leaves that little divot, right? So you want to be able to pull that and stop that. If you stop and lift your brush up, it makes that little divot. So the more paint you have on your brush, the less you have to stop painting, the less divots you're going to get. Some artists, I read a book, they call those torpedoes. There's little torpedoes all over your painting because you're lifting your brush off wrong. So I don't know. I would use a super expensive barbecue brush. Yeah, right? So you can buy barbecue brushes at the dollar store. They come in a 3-pack for $1.99. But better than that, don't ever tell anyone this. If you go to Lee Valley Tools, $6.99, you get 100 barbecue brushes in a bag. There's 100, literally 100. They go from 1 inch to 6 inches, and there's 100 in a bag for $6 or $7. And the hairs all fall out, and they're cheap as crap. But you go, 100 brushes, how are you going to use 100 brushes in 2 years for $6? And they're made for putting on backgrounds and covering canvas and putting on gesso. I use them for repainting over ugly canvases that I have hideous paintings on, that I'm like, oh, hide that quick. All right.
What's the best way to clean a brush from gesso?
Water, just soap and water, but don't use hot water. Just use warm water and clean it out and get it out of the ferrule. And then the cheap barbecue brushes, you can be lazy with those because if it doesn't work, whatever. They're cheap, yeah. Okay, that's it, boys and girls. Wait, Daria was going to ask a question.
So, what if you finish the oil painting and you don't like it and you want to repaint it? So, you probably want to put the gesso.
I don't put gesso on an oil painting. No.
You just repaint.
I put white, I use titanium white paint. So, but you can't put gesso over oil. You can put oil over gesso, but you can't do it the other way around. The paint will fall off. So I just take titanium white. So what I do is, if it's an old painting and I don't like it, I take a piece of sandpaper and I sand it back, and you open up the pores and get it kind of rough. And I take the Graham Fast Dry White and I just put a coat of Fast Dry White on it and cover it over. No, what I do is, on all my paint, when I'm painting, at the end of the day, if I have all this white that's kind of used up and it's all dirty, like contaminated, I scrape that white and I keep it in a big puddle, and I have that white all the time, and I use that white. So it could be anything from gray purple to gray green to red to, I don't know. It's always a light sort of color, but it's tinted with something. But I save all that paint and reuse it. No, I put a little liquid in it and a little thinner in it. Yeah, just enough to get coverage. Yeah, so I paint over all my old canvas. I've never had a problem with that yet.
To repaint over an old canvas after you sand it, just re-gesso it.
Well, I don't sand it that much. That's a lot of work. If you sanded it back that far, you could probably re-gesso it. You can re-gesso, you can use gesso. If you're painting over an acrylic painting, you can put gesso on there and then you can just paint on it again. Yeah. I mean, I would say as long as your painting's under 2 years old, absolutely you can do that. If you get longer than 2 years old, you got to start worrying that paint's pretty dry under there and the new paint isn't going to want to stick to it, and you might have some problems. But I'm pretty sure when I'm done a painting that it's a barfer and it's going somewhere. So it either just gets wiped off right away, or I come down 2 days later and I'm like, this has got to go. Nobody can see this painting. This is terrible.